Waka Wiki, what's up, everybody? I'm about to wrap up that Tomb Raider 2003 game on the laptop, and I'm halfway through editing it as well on said laptop that we're reviewing. But I'm recording this particular session for my podcast, which is called Lemmings, which is available on Apple, Spotify, all those other podcast platforms as well. And the title of this video is What a Fugazi. So it all started a year ago. I was talking to somebody on LinkedIn, which, as you know, isn't really a professional networking forum or platform. It's more of a social media sort of thing where people put up their fake qualifications and their fake titles. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was the roommate of my best friend from college, Matt. And this guy and I were at Matt's wedding, and I was the best man, and this guy Troy was a groomsman, and he was Matt's roommate back when we were all working in Brisbane. Now, Troy is a professor at one of Queensland's biggest polytechnic universities. So him and I were chatting away on LinkedIn, and then I said, hey, can we have like a Zoom call? Because I don't think I can just keep on texting about stuff I want to do with you and the university. He said, sure. So then we had a Zoom call, and we were talking about drones. And then he said, come down to QUT. Whoops, shouldn't have mentioned the name of the university. Come down to the Polytechnic University at Gardens Point, and we'll do a site visit and see if you like what you see. And I did that. So then this other guy who's a connection of Troy's on LinkedIn by the name of John, I won't use any last names because I don't want to be sued for libel, decides to friend me on LinkedIn. And he's like, yeah, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm just in 3D modeling and design, and I want to get into defense. And he's like, oh man, we should get together and talk, because I mean, you know what? I mean, I've got Elon Musk's phone number in my phone. And I was like, I know this guy was full of it. So when I went down to do a site visit at QUT, I had lunch with this guy at Queen Street Mall. Oops, used the university's name a second time. Oh, this has got to get edited so badly. And he's like, so what are you going to be doing when you have the meeting at QUT? And I said, well, we're just going to be looking at search and rescue drones and maybe getting like a project up for the students to build that. And this guy was writing checks that his brain couldn't cash. He's a bit of a dill, and I think he hasn't even finished high school, but I'm not going to hold that against him. And he started pretending that he knew all this stuff about space and defense. And like, everybody wants to become a partner in a business of mine that hasn't even started out yet. And everyone wants 50% of something for nothing. So this guy said, yeah, well, I'll make you the connections, but you have to sign a memorandum of understanding between your company and my company. And I'm like, dude, I don't even have a company. I mean, I've basically registered everything with ATSIC, but as a holding company, but we don't actually have any assets, any leased land, any infrastructure. So I went to see the university and what they were going to be doing, and it was good to catch up with Troy. Hadn't seen him in a couple of years. And after that, the ball got rolling, and I went back down to that university a couple of times to meet the students and get all the simulation and wind tunnel stuff done for a model that they were building. And this guy, John, kept on inviting me to these Zoom calls with complete random people in America who had no professional affiliations with any big organization. And John was expecting me to then, give him equity stake in my company, which didn't even exist as of that stage yet. And then, so John turned out to be a catfish. And I was talking to some people in the space business in the Gold Coast and rocket company. And they said he was the biggest laughing stock in all of Australia. And I said, okay, thanks for letting me know. But John then referred me to this company in the US that has the word orbital in their name, in the Mojave in California. And then he said, oh, you should talk to this other guy by the name of Brian in the US, and he can get you funding. Then you can back these guys at Orbital in the Mojave, and they can do some stuff in space. And I said, I don't know anything about space. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. They'll get like engineers. We'll just get like you and Brian and me to run the administration side of things. And I'm like, whatever. So then I talked to these guys at Orbital. Oops, I used their full name. I've got to edit this. And they sent me through their brochure. And then I forwarded that brochure to that rocket company, which actually does exist at the Gold Coast. And they said, you do realize that this brochure has just got CGI in it. Nothing that's on the cover photos and anything like that is actually real. And I said to the guy, whose name was Pete, I said, yeah, no, Pete, I didn't pick that up, but my 12-year-old son did. And he said, well, your 12-year-old son is sharper than you. And I said, I'm not doubting that. Ultimately, so I got talking to this guy by the name of Brian. He's like, yeah, man, we don't need those guys at Orbital. We can do it ourselves. I mean, I got funding, and I've got a letter of authority from the Emiratis, and I've got a letter of authority from the Saudis, and I've got a letter of authority from the Rothschilds. And then he went on to say, I even got a letter of authority from the lizard people underneath the Denver airport. And I'm like, oh, great, this guy's crazy. That's all I need. I'm already crazy myself. Two crazy people going to business together, that's not such a good idea. So I still let it go, but this guy kept on badgering me, and John kept on badgering me, saying, what are you up to with all this administration stuff? And I only worked for them for like a month for free. And then I said to this guy, Brian, I said, look, mate, I've been working for you for free for a month. I need back pay. He said, yeah, just send me an invoice and it'll be sweet, bro. So I sent him an invoice for like 1 month's worth of salary. And then he just disappeared. So it turned out John was a catfish. The guys at Orbital or Orbital were phony balonies. And this guy Brian was a FUGAZI. Turned out that letter of authority that he had from the Emiratis wasn't even from the family of Maktoum, or whatever the guy's name is. It was a letter of authority that was all forged and belonged to some guy who didn't exist by the name of Al-Hashimi, who only had like a construction company under his name in Dubai. So long story short, I think it was like Christmas time or January. I said to Brian, I said, go fly a kite. I'm not interested anymore. And then everyone who saw my comments on his social media page on Facebook said, this guy doesn't have any money. He's a crackhead. He's just trying to con people out of like their identity so then he can create some sort of wire fraud identity theft scenario, because he's got to sort of feed his crystal meth or crack addiction. And I'm like, well, thank you, John. Thank you for referring me to Brian. And then John, he sort of had a falling out with Elon Musk, apparently. I don't think they ever met. And then he went on to another company or organization in the US by the name of Space Force. And he said to them, yeah, I need 300 million to get some Argon rockets out of like the Ukraine to Australia, so then I can launch a rocket from Keppel Island. And Space Force said, okay. And then John started representing himself as a, representative of Space Force, only for Space Force to then come back in a month's time and say, we're a non-for-profit organization, we don't have that sort of money. And then John said to them, well, I formally tender my resignation. And then Space Force in the US said, sir, we never gave you an employment contract to begin with. So a catfish and a fugazi, and I was stuck in the middle. Long story short, then I get embroiled into a third tangle of lies. This guy Brian recommends these Ukrainians over in Kharkiv or Sumy to do some webpage development for me. And then that ended up being a whole entire pyramid scheme. They were going to build me a webpage on the premise that I was going to find them investors for their company in Australia. And Australia has half the population of Ukraine. And yet they thought they were going to find some venture capitalist firms here that were going to invest in their company, which didn't provide a service and also didn't provide a product. Just had a web page where you have a repository where you throw in your ideas, and they basically then give you a QR code with a unique certificate registering your idea. That was the whole business premise of their model. And I'm like, what a load of baloney. Because we were talking with Troy about patents, and I mean, even if you have a patent on a design like these drones we're building, that doesn't mean anything if you actually pay $10,000 to $100,000 of the patent. All the patent guarantees is that you were the first one to come up with a design. And then if you want to contest that with somebody else who actually then creates the prototype, you have to have the money to go to court to contest that you were the first one to come up with the design. And even on top of that, I think the judge and the jury doesn't look at who comes up with the design first. They come up with a decision on who has a valid claim based on who actually made the prototype first. So try explaining that to these Ukrainians who think they've got a great idea. So I had to deal with a catfish in Australia, a phony baloney rocket company in the Mojave, a Fugazi in Vegas, and then some idiots in Ukraine. And that's why we call this little short podcast and video, What a Fugazi. And yet, I'm not in a straitjacket going to a nut house yet, or on any psychotics, because I had the gut feeling when the first time I talked to John that he was a phony. The first time I talked to Brian, I knew he was a fraud. And the first time I talked to these guys at Orbital, I knew they were faking it. And the first time I talked to these Ukrainians, I knew they were gangsters. So when you go in expecting disappointment, you don't feel upset at the end. And I don't get upset anymore, because if you get upset, that's what flares up my kidney stones. Not physical exertion, but any sort of mental anguish. So, yeah, I don't like it when my kidney stones get flared up. So I'm all zen and chill now. That's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed it. There'll be more podcasts coming back on lemmings. That's LEMMINGS. Our motto is, when life gives you lemmings, make lemonade. This is Masupalami signing out. Have a good one, people.